the last chapter in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 13 tonight. Nehemiah chapter 13. Before we get started in the scriptures, is there any prayer requests? It's kind of long, but at least it's not full of names like some of the others have been. But I think it closes out good. Nehemiah was a great leader, and I think we find that all through the book, but I think it closes out that way as well. So the 13th chapter of Nehemiah. On that day they read in the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein was found written that the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever, because they met not the children of Israel with bread and with water, but hired Balaam against them, that he should curse them, howbeit our God turned the curse into a blessing. Now it came to pass, when they had heard the law, that they separated from Israel all the mixed multitude. And before this, Eliashib the priest, having the oversight of the chamber of the house of our God, was allied unto Tobiah, and he had prepared for him a great chamber, where aforetime they laid the meat offerings, the frankincense, and the vessels, and the tithes of corn, the new wine, the oil, which was commanded to be given to the Levites, and the singers, and the porters, and the offerings of the priest. But in all this time was not I at Jerusalem. Of course, this is Nehemiah talking here. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king of Babylon came I unto the king, and after certain days obtained I leave of the king. And I came to Jerusalem, and understood of the evil that Eliashib did for Tobiah, in preparing him a chamber in the courts of the house of God. And it grieved me sore, therefore I cast forth all the household stuff of Tobiah out of the chamber. Then I commanded, and they cleansed the chambers, and thither brought I again the vessels of the house of God, with the meat offering and the frankincense. And I perceived that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, for the Levites and the singers that did the work were fled every one to his field. Then contended I with the rulers, and said, Why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place, then brought all Judah the tithe of corn and the new wine and the oil into the treasuries. And I made treasurers over the treasuries, Shemaiah the priest, Zadok the scribe of the Levites, Pedaiah, and next to them was Hanan the son of Zachor, the son of Mattaniah, for they were counted faithful, and their office was to distribute unto the brethren. Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and wipe not out my good deeds that I have done for the house of my God, and for the offenses thereof, or for the offices thereof. In those days saw I Judah some treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves, and lading asses, also wine, grapes, and figs, and all manner of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I testified against them in the day wherein they sold victuals. There dwelt men of Tyre, also therein, which brought fish and all manner of ware, and sold on the Sabbath unto the children of Judah. And in Jerusalem then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said unto them, What evil thing is this that ye do, and profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers thus, and did not our God bring all this evil upon us, and upon this city? Yet you bring me more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath. And it came to pass, that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut, and charged that they should not be opened till after the Sabbath, and some of my servants set I at the gates, that there should be no burden be brought on the Sabbath day. So the merchants and sellers of all kind of ware lodged without Jerusalem once or twice. Then I testified against them, and said unto them, Why lodge ye about the wall? If you do so again, I'll lay hands on you. From that time forth came they no more on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, and that they should come and keep the gates, to sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of thy mercy. In those days also saw I Jews that had married wives of Ashdod, of Ammon, and Moab. And their children spake half in the speech of Ashdod, could not speak in Jews' language, but according to the language of each people. And I contended with them, and cursed them, and smote certain of them, and plucked off their hair, and made them swear by God, saying, Ye shall not give your daughters unto their sons, nor take their daughters unto your sons, or for yourselves. Did not Solomon the king of Israel sin by these things? Yet among many nations was there no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over Israel, over all Israel. Nevertheless, even him did outlandish women cause to sin. Shall we then hearken unto you to do all this great evil, to transgress against our God in marrying strange wives? And one of the sons of Joadah, son of Eliashib, the high priest, was son-in-law to Sanballat, the Hornite. Therefore I chased him from me. Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and of the Levites. Thus cleansed I them from all strangers, and appointed the wards of the priests and the Levites, every one in his business, and for the word offering at times appointed, and for the wood offering at times appointed, and for the first fruits, remember me, O my God, for good. So that's the last chapter, chapter 13 of Nehemiah. And starts out there in those first 3 verses there, and the whole chapter is, I guess, Nehemiah sitting back and telling this after the fact. But there's a lot of this chapter almost, it seems like a prayer to me. Maybe he's praying for these people as well, and I know he did. But these first 3 verses here, they show us, and it reminds me of Paul over in the New Testament. Here's Nehemiah. He's been over here and he's rebuilt the wall of Jerusalem. He has showed them, okay, then this is the way we're to do and to go. And so now he has got them on the right track. He's got the wall. He's got the city repopulated. He's got the Levites have been brought in. So there's their defenses are up. They're good to go. So now he's gone back after his ruler. He's gone back, and now he's heard about how they've strayed from the way. And we find that over in the New Testament in Paul's writing, where he goes and starts a church, and I always think of the Galatians, but I think it's chapter 3 there starts out, says, "Oh, you foolish Galatians," you know. And when I read that, I think about America, and I think, "Oh, you foolish Americans," you know. And so that's what I'm reminded of when I read these first few verses. Is he's finding out here in these first few verses about how that they have strayed away and done things contrary to what he had taught them, and kind of like we do a lot of times. We raise our children, and sometimes we as children stray from our teachings, don't we? That the way our parents raised us, and our grandparents taught us, and our church family taught us, we stray from that. And these people were no different. They had strayed away from what Nehemiah had taught them, and so Nehemiah now is on his way back, and he's getting back here to set them straight. And just like Paul in the New Testament, when Paul spoke, he spoke boldly. He asked them to pray that way. Pray for me that I might speak boldly as I ought to speak, he told them. And so we need that in a great leader. They need to be able to speak boldly, and when they do speak, as Nehemiah did, the people listened, and the people should listen. Right. And so they've strayed away, and he's come. He's reminding them of the law. So the law is being read to them. So now maybe they're realizing that sometimes we may, and we find on down in here. I'm jumping ahead maybe a little bit, but sometimes we push the limits a little bit, don't we? well, the speed limit sign says 60, so I'll set my cruise on 64 and I'll be okay. Well, 61 is speeding in it, but we're doing 64, 70, or whatever it might be. So we push the limits of things like that sometimes, and they push the limits maybe just like we get down to reading about the Sabbath day. He shoved them all out of the city and got that took care of. Well, then they lined up around the wall on the outside and decided they'd do it out there, and he decided that wasn't any better, so he run them away from the wall and said, you do it again, I'll lay my hands on you. And so they push the limits, and we don't want to push the limits. When we do that, we get kind of complacent, kind of it's a lot like Sundays are today. Sunday's just another day as far as society's concerned today. It really is. It's no different than Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. It's just another day. There's nothing holy about it as far as what society is concerned today. And it hadn't been all that long ago when I was a child. I mean, that seems like a long time ago for some, but it's not really been that long ago. And you that are older than me, remember, you didn't drive to church on Sunday and see people mowing the yard. You just didn't do it. But I seen one or two Sunday morning when I went to town and come to church there. They mowing the yard, and you just didn't see that. You didn't see many people out in public drunk. Now they'd go and they drink in private and do those things, but now they'll walk up and down the street that way. You just didn't see those things because now society has said, well, it's all right. We've become calloused to it, I guess. We just don't see anything wrong with it, and we need not be that way. So that's kind of what these people were doing. They kind of strayed away a little bit, and the more they strayed, it's just kind of the more the normal seemed to be, and the normal's not always the way we should go. We need to make sure we're doing the right things for the Lord. So they were reminded. Sometimes we need reminding and we need correction, and once they had heard, then they begin to correct some of the wrongs. And once God reveals our shortfallings and our wrongs to us, we too need to correct that. And then when we correct that, don't go back to it. Don't fall back in the same rut. Don't do the same thing. But we may often, sometimes as society, be guilty of that. Even when we do maybe correct a wrongful thing, we run right back into the same rut. And so when we correct those things, we shouldn't go back to them. Those next couple of verses there, 4 and 5, were Eliashib the priest here. And I didn't read up on Tobiah, but the commentator talked about Tobiah being a wicked man. But Eliashib made room for him in the church there. He moved him in there and made room for him. And in my first thought of that, it reminds me that there's room for everybody at God's house. There really is. Doesn't matter saint or sinner. There's room for you in God's house at the right place, right time, and right reason. I don't know what might have been going on here, but Elisha had moved Tobiah in, and when, as we read on down through here, when Nehemiah got word of it, he run old Tobiah out. It talks about how he went in there and grabbed his stuff and threw it out the door. So there's place for everyone at God's house. There really is, but we don't need to be high-minded, thinking we're better than the quote-unquote sinners are, or the average sinner. I've got in my note here that we don't want to think that we're better than they are, because we're really not. We need not think that we're better than they are, but we also need to keep reading and not forget that God's house is supposed to be respected. It's supposed to be honored. It's supposed to be cared for. We're supposed to show respect to it in everything that we do. So it's a sacred place, and as far as again society is concerned today, a lot of church houses have lost their sacredness, and people have lost or misplaced maybe their respect and honor for God's house, and so evidently that's what had happened here, because Nehemiah gets word of what's going on here, and in these next few verses here down through 9, Nehemiah had returned here and begin to correct the wrongs that had been done. The first thing he did was throw a wicked Tobiah out of the sanctuary, and so I don't I don't know what Tobiah was doing. Maybe Elisha had good intentions there. Maybe Elisha didn't know, but it seems like that maybe Elisha just wasn't fully doing his part. He wasn't being the priest that he needed to be, or the pastor there that he needed to be. And something was going on in the church there, and he threw old Tobiah out, and grabbed all his stuff and threw it out.
Brother Heath, my commentary part of my Bible here says that he was Elisha?
Mm-hmm.
The priest was married to Tobiah's daughter.
Oh.
And that's how Tobiah got was able to influence him.
Trying to keep the wife happy, what he was doing. By forsaking the house of the Lord. So that would make sense if Tobiah was a brother-in-law to Elisha, then Elisha was trying to keep his wife happy, and in the process forsaking the house of the Lord. And I don't mean that funny, but do we not do that sometimes? Not necessarily keeping our wives or husbands happy, but maybe to keep from conflict, or to keep somebody from being mad at us, we maybe will back away from something, or not stand firm like we should on something.
Be influenced, good.
Be influenced, yeah.
What is it they always say, blood's thicker than water?
Blood's thicker than water, yeah. Those next several verses down through 14 is where Nehemiah is rebuking some of the rulers here, and some of the things that they're doing, and one of the things was they neglected the Levites, and the Levites were they, would you call them the caretakers, I guess, of the church maybe, or the priest and the singers and the different things there. They were a big part in the church, and they'd been forsaken. They had neglected them. And Nehemiah reminds God there, I thought when I read those verses, he's kind of telling God there, the last verse there talks about, remember me, O God, concerning this, wipe out not my good deeds, for I have done, that I have done for the house of my God and for the offices thereof. That kind of sounds to me like Nehemiah saying, God, I taught these people better than this. Don't hold this against me. I taught them better than this. And I believe Nehemiah was very ashamed of them, and I believe God was too. And sometimes he is of us as well when we make these same mistakes. And that's where we don't have an excuse a lot of times, making the mistakes, doing the things that we do. We've got this to read and think, boy, that was wrong. And then we go and do the same thing. What excuse do we have? We don't, do we? We don't have an excuse. So, 15 through 22 again is some more rebuke goes on there. And this time it has to do with the Sabbath day. And this is where the gates were secured, and all the things going on the Sabbath, all the selling and the buying and all these things going on the Sabbath. That was all, he done away with that, run them out of the city. And the gates were secured, and the merchants even come up to, lined up, I guess, around the outside of the wall, thinking the people would come out to them. And Nehemiah said, no, that's not going to happen either. It's not going to happen just in the city. It's not going to happen out there either. And so Nehemiah is a great leader in trying to take care of the people. And people probably, just like today's time, people think, oh, that's old stuff. There's nothing wrong with those things today. But we still should remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. It's one of the 10 Commandments, right? So we ought to do that. We ought to honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And he said, yeah, it's not going to happen. Not only in the city, it ain't going to happen out there either. And so I liked what he said there. You come back, I'll put my hands on you. Verse 21, then I testified against them and said unto them, why lodge ye about the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. And from that time forth, they came no more. He got the point across, and meant what he said, and said what he meant. So they knew Nehemiah was serious in what he was saying. And then all down through the rest of the chapter there through 31, again, just a great display of leadership, him coming back and trying to correct them. He had already shown them the way to go. Now he's reminding them, hey, these things aren't going to take place, not here in this city, and not with you people, and so he's corrected those things, and it seems to me like I don't really have anything to back this up, but it seems to me like he's praying a lot through this, and maybe this is a conversation he's having with God. Maybe he's sitting out under a tree somewhere after the fact when he's writing this down, talking to God about it, and he says there again, to be remembered in verse 29, remember me, O my God. And want to be remembered. And there was a quote here from Chuck Swindoll, or Charles Swindoll, that I wanted to add in here, and he says, I think it is significant that the final scene in Nehemiah's book portrays him on his knees asking God for grace. He had fought hard for the right, but he kept his heart soft before the Lord. What a magnificent model of leadership. He was a man of honesty, conviction, and devotion. So, great leader he was. He built the wall, defended the city, and rebuked and corrected the people within it, and not only stood back and told them how to do and what to do, but I believe probably set the example for them as well. That's what I always liked in bosses that I've had down through the years. They like those bosses that don't ask you to do something they haven't done or won't do themselves, you know. So I like that. I think that's what Nehemiah was. He was right there building the wall with them. He was fighting with them. He was praying with them, worshiping with them. What do you have that you want to add?
This kind of reminded me of Moses too, when he went up to get the 10 Commandments and come back down, and the people had strayed away and worshiping idols and things. And it didn't take them long either. So they turned away, and that's the way these were when Nehemiah had gone back to Susa. They kind of strayed away and let things in that they shouldn't have, and got in trouble. But I too like those verses where Nehemiah says, remember me, O God. You know, I think he knew God was going to punish them if they didn't straighten up, and he didn't want to be in on that punishment.
Mm-hmm. When I read this chapter, I was reminded of David Bumpus when he talks about when he and Cindy began to date. And he had gone to Cindy's house, or she lived, of course, with her mom and dad at the time. And remember that her dad, what's his name? Lost his name. Harry Baldwin. Brother Baldwin said, son, do you go to church? I said, no, sure don't. You do now. Yeah, I said, you do now. He said, you'll go with us. And so, and he wasn't a Christian man at the time. And that's one thing that I didn't put in my notes that I read in here and should have added. Let's see. This is from Campbell. I don't have a first name right here handy, but it's the last name, Campbell. It says the New Testament adds its consistent witness against marriages between believers and unbelievers. Paul directed believers to marry only in the Lord in 1 Corinthians 7:39. Yet today, as in previous ages, some believers rationalize that they will leave the unsaved mate to the Lord, but it rarely works that way, and children more often than not follow the ways of the unregenerate parent. And so it's not it's not an always thing, because Brother David talks about how he was not a Christian for a long time during their marriage, and through her witness and her life and the life of her family and others as well, and the prayers of others, he became a Christian, but
It just makes it harder if you go on my marriage or anything like that, if you pull in two different directions, you're not gonna get very far with it. It's
tug
not good.
of war.
Yeah. Everybody pulling the same direction, you get somewhere.
And again, it's not 100% thing that, you know, if an unbeliever marries a believer or what have you, that, but there have been times when the believer's has given up and gone the other way.
Yeah.
And I can see that, would be easy to do. I can really see that would be easy to do, but.
There was a minister preached his wife's funeral years ago. I listened to it. It was really good. And he told a lot of stories, but one of the stories that he told was, he said this old boy come to his door, was gonna take his daughter. And he asked him who he was and stuff, and he liked it, so he shut the door. I told the lady to shut the door. Well, his daughter come down the stairs, he said, and she said, was that for me? He said, no, that wasn't for you. He said, you can't get no racehorse out of a mule. That's what he said. And he said that, I'll be glad to tell you now, he's the president of some college, the one that she did marry him, but it was funny, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
That unevenly yoked.
Yeah.
My grandfather, Walter Wilson, showed me that when I was really small.
Mm-hmm.
He had a big white mare and a small red mare. Now you could work in the fields all day long. Betty, the red mare, would give out. No Pearl just keep on.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have both of them hooked to the wagon and they couldn't go anymore. You'd take Betty and turn her loose and she'd go to the barn, hook Pearl to the wagon, and she'd take the wagon to the barn.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were unevenly yoked by the end of the day. They start out in the morning, they'd both even and pull together. But by the end of the day, they were unevenly yoked, and you couldn't get anywhere with them together. You had to turn one of them loose.
What else do you have?